Alrighty, I think we're going to get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Spotlight PA event. I'm Elizabeth Estrada, the democracy editor at Spotlight PA, and I just want to express my gratitude to you all for joining us this Thursday evening. We're so excited to get to your election questions. So for those of you who are new to our programming, I want to share with you a little bit about Spotlight. We are an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit newsroom that produces investigative and public service journalism about our state government and statewide pressing issues. Our team here is here for you to help you navigate Pennsylvania elections and everything that comes along with it, from importing voting deadlines to candidate guides to primers on obscure government processes and even interactive voting tools. But we can't do any of this work without your support. So I want to take a moment here to pause and ask that if you have the means to please consider making a donation to our organization. You can do so by visiting spotlightpa.org/elections. /donate. I'm getting ahead of myself. That's spotlightpa.org/donate. And right now, as part of our end of year campaign, all donations that are made will be tripled thanks to matching grants. And your support allows us to not only make this event possible and future events, but also to make our journalism free and available to the public. So once again, if you believe in our work, I recommend and suggest that if you're able to please make a donation to make our work possible and to continue. You can visit spotlightpa.org/donate. Now, a few housekeeping notes. Today's event is being recorded and will be posted on our website over the next few days for those who weren't able to make it. And for those of you who submitted questions ahead of time, thank you so much. If anything comes up throughout the conversation this evening, please feel free to submit a question of your own in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we're going to try to get to it at the end of our program. So with all that said, I'm really excited to get this conversation about voting underway. Tonight's panel is going to focus on your voting rights, key dates, and everything that you need to know so that you can head to the polls next Tuesday, November 7th on Election Day and feel confident and ready to cast your ballot. So let's talk a little bit about the ballot. On the ballot next week, Pennsylvanians will be voting on several statewide judicial races. And these kinds of races typically don't get the level of attention that they deserve or the kind of voter turnout that other elections do. But despite that, they are still incredibly important and critical elections. So on the ballot next week, voters will be deciding who our next state Supreme Court justice will be, along with who will fill the next 2 vacant seats on Superior Court and the empty seat on Commonwealth Court. In addition to that, voters will also be deciding as to whether 2 Superior Court judges will get another term. Now, depending on where you live in the state, I'm in Philadelphia. This applies to me. You may also be voting in several municipal races. So that means you might be voting for mayor, school board, some municipal court district judges, and so on. So that's a little bit about what you can expect to see on the ballot next week. But let's get into it now. I want to welcome 2 esteemed election experts who are going to be joining us this evening to answer your questions and share their wealth of knowledge with us. First up, I want to introduce Shalua Agunmefin. Shalua is the executive director at Pennsylvania Voice, which is an organization that works with partners to expand democracy and protect voting rights. Previously, she also served as a civic engagement and political manager at the Center for Popular Democracy. And also, she served as the political director for One Pennsylvania. Shalua, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. So excited for this conversation.
Yeah, we're so excited to hear from you. Also joining us this evening is Jeff Greenberg. Jeff serves as a senior advisor on election administration at the Committee of 70, a nonpartisan and nonprofit organization that aims to improve the voting process and inform and engage citizens here in our beautiful state of Pennsylvania. He has also served as the director of elections for Mercer County from 2007 to July 2020. So we know that he has a lot to share with us about the election process. Jeff, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
So, to get started, I just want you both to share a little bit about the organizations that you work at, that you're representing this evening for those who may not be familiar. So, Jeff, can you share with us a little bit about Committee of 70?
Sure. The Committee of 70 has been around for almost 120 years. It has a wonderful reputation. In fact, a good enough reputation that I reached out to them last year looking for work. While I still had work, their reputation preceded them across the Commonwealth for the work that they do for trying to encourage good government, to try to keep an eye on governments. So they have done wonderful work. My hope was in joining them was to be able to expand in some way the support for elections officials, which is not something that is primarily focused on. The Committee of 70 does wonderful work with youth civics. They partner with businesses to try to encourage people to be involved and engaged in voting. Uh, they work on focusing on ethics in government as well as many other issues. So, a great partnership. Uh, and I'm hoping to be around for many more years as well. So my primary focus since joining them has been to focus on support of elections officials, training poll workers, and trying to make sure that our legislators in Harrisburg hopefully understand those needs and how they can better support our elections officials across the Commonwealth.
Amazing, such important critical work. And I know that we're going to talk a little bit more about how folks can get involved in elections later on this evening. So I'm sure you'll have plenty of opportunities to share with folks. Shallow, I want to hear from you. Can you share with us a little bit about Pennsylvania Voice, what it is, and the kind of work that you do there?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, I get the honor of being the executive director of Pennsylvania Voice. And we are a partnership of organizations. Jeff just talked a little bit about what Committee of 70 does, and the good government aspect of that work. There are so many organizations across the Commonwealth that are working every day to make sure that our government functions in the way that it should, whether that be from encouraging civic engagement and participation, whether that be through legislation and pushing to make it easier to vote in Pennsylvania and make sure that some of the policies that we already have are working the best for all Pennsylvanians, or whether that be engaging in the redistricting process and then the census to make sure that we have districts that can accurately represent the interest of the communities to which they're intended to serve. We have over 50 partners across the Commonwealth that are working towards that fully representative and participatory government, from a lot of different angles and a lot of different ways, many different geographies. Some are legal groups like the ACLU, some good government groups like Common Cause, or All Voting is Local, base building and mobilization groups like Make the Road, CASA, 1PA, direct service organizations like Project Home, all committed towards a democracy that includes full participation and representation. So me and my staff get to facilitate the partnership and work on behalf of creating that change in Pennsylvania. And it's been my honor and privilege to be able to do so.
Yeah, I can definitely hear the passion and excitement in your voice when you talk about it. So I'm so curious. Can you share with us a little bit about why voting and participating in our democracy is important to you and kind of how that's driven you to the work that you do today at Pennsylvania Voice and even beyond that?
Yeah, so I love this question. I just want to say I don't get to talk about this as much as I get to talk about what's currently happening. But for me, so much of the work that I do every day comes back to education. My favorite part of the work I do every day is trainings, to be honest, and getting to talk to folks about our systems, how they work, how they can work better for us. But it really started for me within the school district of Philadelphia. I moved to Pennsylvania to go to college, Temple University, TU. Um, and during the time that I was there, I got the opportunity to work within some of the school district schools. I went to school for engineering, and so I got to mentor some robotics teams at some high schools and middle schools within Philly. And one of the things that I realized fairly early on was like, okay, I'm trying to build this robot and we're working on programming it, taking raw materials and turning them into something that can accomplish a goal. But along the way, like I'm realizing realizing that there's some fundamental like skill sets that, you know, I had the experience of having that like students just didn't have the same experience of within the schools. And so when I graduated, instead of going into engineering, I ended up going into education with the school district, and working a little bit more downtown at 440 and better understanding some of the dynamics that led to the experience that I had when I was mentoring in the schools. And so much of it comes down to resources, and so much of it comes down to the decisions of adults. That children have absolutely no say in, but it governs their lives every day from 7 a.m. until 3 p.m. And so for me, I really stepped into my understanding of the importance of voting in elections by wanting to better understand who had the power to make those decisions, who got to decide this school gets this much or this money is going to be spent in this way, that affected like the students that I was working with every day. And the reality is when you track back who gets to make those decisions, it's those folks inside of the state capitol. And so right now, you know, there's a question about school funding, you know, and the state Supreme Court, which, you know, right now we get the opportunity to vote next week on who is going to continue to be on that state Supreme Court and who we're going to add to that same Supreme Court. They made a decision that the current funding formula for those schools was unconstitutional, that the experience that I had in those Philadelphia schools when I was just there mentoring for a short amount of time is actually unconstitutional. And that's important because we have to rectify that in order for those students to have what they need, for those families to have what they deserve, what their tax dollars are going towards. And so for me, voting is a piece of power. My vote helps to make sure that those students get the education that they deserve. And so for me, that's both the personal reason that I got into voting work, but also why this election in particular is so important. Because if that court doesn't continue to believe that our kids deserve to be educated, what happens in the Philadelphia public schools?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. There's so much there. Wow. To go from engineering to doing the kind of work you do now, it might not make sense, but when you talk about it, like those through lines make so much sense and really resonate. You mentioned on school funding, I do just want to share with folks regarding the Supreme Court and other courts as well. You can go to spotlightpa.org/why judges matter, and you can read up on different cases, including the one that Shalawa just mentioned about school funding and it being unconstitutional. You can read a little bit more about that if you're interested. But Jeff, I'm curious about you. What kind of has driven you to your work, and you know, what role has like voting and our government kind of played in your life to get you to the point where you are now doing the work that you do?
Well, and let me take two tracks here real quick. So Charlotte kind of prompted some ideas as far as voting itself. So I wasn't going to necessarily go this direction, but this isn't my line. But I love the framing. I found this line the other day, and it said, voting is the language of democracy. It's how we make our voices heard. And elections officials are the folks who are really, in my mind, the people who are preserving that language. So they preserve that language. But first of all, looking outward, why is voting important? Well, we all know, we hear the stories about voting impacting our lives, particularly municipal elections, where they control your pocketbook, the pocketbook issues much more directly than our federal governments do. But I love to tell the story about the idea of how every vote matters. So we have our biggest city in huge rural Mercer County is of about 16,000 people. And we often hear races where they come down to one vote, tie vote. And usually those are very small races, like dozens of votes. But we had a city commissioner's race one year that ended in a tie where both candidates got more than 1,500 votes, which is so unusual and rare. And the tie was broken by a casting of lots. So literally the candidates are pulling numbered ping pong balls out of a bag, and whoever drew the number one ball, they win the seat. That's how we do it in Pennsylvania when we're breaking ties. I learned after the election from the losing candidate, this was one of the most remarkable things I ever heard, that his wife decided not to vote that election. So if she had voted, he would not have ended in a tie and lost the casting of lots. He would have won by one vote. I assume she would have voted for him. I don't want to guess, but I assume. So that's why it's important. Now, why I do the work. So look, I came to this profession. It's a long and winding road, but honestly, I had a passion for elections and politics as a teenager. I went to Washington, D.C., did all kinds of stuff, had my political career mapped out. This was the year I was going to run for Congress. This was, one of those typical teenagers that have no idea what's coming. And of course, life takes a couple odd turns. But I ended up as a reporter for a local newspaper for 15 years. In the last 5 years of that career, I covered government, politics. And that ended up leading me to being hired by the county when an opening came for the elections position. And I thought, well, how hard can this be? I love politics. I love elections. It was hard. But that passion, that same passion that I had, I thought this would be a great way to contribute just in a different version. I didn't have to run for office. I didn't have to do kiss babies. I didn't have to do all this stuff, but I could impact elections in a different way and help voters and help candidates at the same time. When I retired from the county in 2020, I really was not ready to give up supporting elections and contributing. I thought it was too important to completely walk away, but my time as an election official was done. I knew it was time for me to walk away. And I was fortunate to be offered a position with the National Voting Organization so I could keep engaged, the National Vote at Home Institute. That transitioned into a Pennsylvania organization, the Voter Project, and then to the Committee of 70. And I was so close last year to retiring. I didn't think I was going to continue. I had lost 2 years ago, I should say. I lost my job, and the folks at the Voter Project reached out to me out of the blue and said, "We have this opportunity for you." And I am so thankful for them for bringing me back in, and thankful for the Committee of 70 for allowing me to continue this work. I'm not ready to give up the fight. And I don't think anybody who's an advocate at this time in our country should be ready to give up the fight. This is something we're at a point that it's too critical to walk away. Maybe when I hit 70, maybe we'll be in a position where I can feel good enough to walk away. Maybe not. But at this point, I feel like it's all hands on deck. And I feel like anybody who has an interest in protecting our democracy, it's critical to stay engaged and stay involved. And so hopefully that will be several more years, if not more, for me.
Yeah, I love that. Wow, by one vote. That is a wild story. And I also love the quote that voting is the language of democracy. There's so much there. I feel like we can have a conversation with each of you about your whole personal histories and voting. But we are here to answer the people's questions. So I want to get into it. Let's get into some of those specific questions. So I want to, before we get into like those nitty gritty, I just want to ask more broadly, more generally, what are some things that people should keep in mind, and what are important things that people should remember when it comes to voting and actually like participating? Like, give me 101, very basic, shallow. What are some things that folks should remember right off the bat if they want to vote?
The first thing I would say is look up who you want to vote for before you get to the polling location on election day. You're making really important decisions, and making sure that you can make a decision that's best for you, your family, and your community sometimes requires you to do a little bit of research before you get there. So I'll say that first and foremost. But then also, our lives are really busy. And so whether you are planning on returning your vote by mail ballot, which I would highly suggest in person from now through election day, or you're planning on voting in person on election day, just take a few moments and stop and think about, how am I actually going to do this? What is that process going to look like? What time of day am I going to vote? Am I going to be going before work, after work? Where are my children going to be during the time that I go vote? Just make sure that you make that plan. Because sometimes when the day gets really hectic and you didn't make that plan, you end up at home, it's 8:01, and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot to vote. So those are the two things that I'd recommend folks do. Make sure before you get there and before you open your vote by mail ballot to complete it that you look up who it is that you want to vote for. If you're in one of the places that have referendums or other things on the ballot, you may want to look up what those things mean as well. And then make sure you make a plan to either return your vote by mail ballot in person between now and election day, just a suggestion, or make a plan to vote on election day in person at your polling location.
I love that. That's excellent advice. So research and make a plan. Jeff, anything to add?
Well, and she got me thinking that when you talk about research, I think engaging yourself in trying to learn as much as you can about the candidates. I watched a forum, I think it was a week ago or so now, that had all or almost all of the statewide judicial candidates, and I realized that in my lifetime, that's all I've almost never done that as a voter. Like actually got to hear the statewide judicial candidates speak. Was it going to maybe inform me in some way or help me make a better decision? Maybe, maybe not. But just to hear them speak was like remarkable, all in one event, and it gave me a chance to kind of assess each of them and their strengths and weaknesses. And so if you have the opportunity as a voter and you see those types of events being promoted, those are extremely helpful. Even on the local level, our county commissioners have had a couple forums. I didn't make it in person, but I had the opportunity to watch one of them virtually. And again, just to see how they answer questions, it's a great thing. As far as preparation beyond what was suggested, as far as understanding and learning the ballot, because you're not going to have time to fully understand maybe a ballot question or read the plain English statement at a precinct and fully understand it. And our poll workers aren't going to help you. They're not allowed to. They're not allowed to tell you what the question means or what the plain English statement means. So doing that ahead of time is critical. But also for yourself, I always encourage voters to double check their voter registrations, to double check their polling locations. So these are things that counties occasionally move a polling location, sometimes at the last minute due to an emergency. And while we would always send new voter cards to those voters impacted, it's possible that you didn't see it or you threw it away or you thought it was junk mail. So don't always assume that everything is going to be the same. And just because you voted at the same location for 10 years, that's going to be the place you vote. So you should, in some way, go to your county's website, go to the state website. Both of them have resources that will, number one, help you figure out to make sure that your voter registration is up to date. Number one, where you vote. And then number two, if your polling location is still at the same place.
That's all very solid, very tangible things. So once again, research who's on the ballot, where do you stand on the candidates, make a plan to vote, double check your voter registration that it is active and you can indeed vote in the upcoming election, and also double check your polling place because sometimes they do change, construction, things happen, things get moved around. These are all fantastic. And I want to follow up on the kind of making a plan because we are all very busy people and sometimes election day sneaks up on us. So I'm just curious if either of you have kind of any tangible advice that you have for folks to kind of find a time and maybe go with a buddy and set up a plan for them to go in a way that like will be successful and that they can follow through on. Shallow, I'm going to throw that to you.
Yeah, I think that it's always fun to do things with friends. And so I think heeding that recommendation, and not just thinking about yourself, but also texting your family and friends. And just like asking them, like, hey, after you make your plan to vote, just ask them, like, hey, I'm gonna go vote at this time on this day. Do you want to come with me? Maybe you guys can make a I don't want to say a party, but party at the polls. Maybe you guys can make a plan to actually go vote together, grab a coffee on your way out. But worst case scenario, like you guys don't go together, but then you get to engage in a conversation. Maybe they have some questions they haven't had a chance to look up, and maybe you know the answers. And the more that we actually engage our family and friends, the more people who may think like us, and the more people who may have the same interests, the same desires, want the same things out of government as as us that actually participate, the more likely we are to make sure that we get what we want out of state government. And so I love that idea of inviting your friends and your family to actually vote with you. But at the very least, just texting them and asking them about what their plans are to vote on election day too.
And
Love
I'll
that.
add, so my part of the plan, as you might expect as a former election official, was more logistical, X's and O's. And so I would always advise voters. So the one thing that they should be cognizant of, depending on how much time they have to be able to wait to vote, that is what should help them determine when they want to go vote. So clearly there are ebbs and flows as far as the crowds at our polling locations. So if you can't wait, 30 minutes or maybe an hour, don't show up at 7 o'clock when the polls open, because there's going to be likely there's going to be a line. We always advise voters that had, minimal time, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, and even early evening after the dinner hour were sometimes the best times to go. You're more than likely going to find fewer voters in the precinct. So it helps for voters to plan depending on the time. Now I know there's limitations based on jobs or based on childcare that you cannot overcome that. But if you have the opportunity and you have some flexibility, it's certainly a good thing to go during the times of day when there are likely to be fewer voters. It'll make your experience a little bit better.
Yeah, I love that. I think the logistical stuff is really important to think about. If you're using public transit, like how long is that going to take you? If you have to be at work by a certain time or you have to be home by a certain time, all of those things really come into play when you are trying to figure out the best time. But we focus on actually physically going to the polling place, but another option that Pennsylvanians have is voting by mail. And so, Jeff, I'm curious, can you talk a little bit about how can Pennsylvanians vote by mail? And this is something that a lot of people have lots of feelings about or concerns about, especially when it comes to kind of how safe and secure that process is. So can you also talk us through, like in your experience, what happens when somebody actually submits their mail ballot, and how can we ensure that like that process is like actually solid and safe?
If you don't mind, can I take this down a different path first, slightly? Because my
Sure.
thing is, I'd like to help voters today, since we are after the deadline. So, like, I feel like if we can focus on what should be important to male voters right now between now and Tuesday, if that's okay, I'd be happy to go back after. But let me, and if we
Absolutely.
can do this, is that okay? So,
Yeah.
first of all, if you're voting by mail and you haven't returned your ballot yet, time is almost out. Get it back. The deadline, obviously, to apply was Tuesday, but there are emergency period deadline periods in Pennsylvania law that some folks might not be aware of through election day, in fact. So if a scenario comes up, like you end up in an auto accident, and so you end up in a hospital, and you did not know at the time after the Tuesday deadline that you would not be able to go vote in person Tuesday, there are emergency applications that can be that you can do um, that it, and you should contact your county for any details on that. There's the ability for somebody to carry the application and the ballot both ways in those emergency periods. If you have your ballot right now, so you've applied, you have your ballot, as already been said, we would strongly recommend you consider returning it in person. So if you put it in the mail and it doesn't arrive at your county by 8 o'clock on Tuesday, it's no good. Postmarks don't count. It doesn't matter. And I can tell you, even in a small county like Mercer, I received ballots 10 days after they're postmarked in some elections, after they were postmarked, to go 15 miles across the county. Now, I know they went further than 15 miles. So you cannot at this point trust that the Postal Service is going to absolutely, with 100% certainty, deliver your ballot. If you can get it to a drop box or your county election office, you should do that now. Another option, if you have concerns about returning the ballot on time and you are able to go to the polls on Tuesday, bring the ballot and the declaration envelope. That's the envelope that you sign and date. Bring it with you to the polls. You can surrender it to the judge of elections and then sign an affirmation, and you will get to vote a regular ballot. If you applied near the deadline, you just applied Tuesday, and honestly, unfortunately, it becomes really difficult for folks who apply this close to the deadline to, number one, get their ballot in time, and number two, get the ballot back in time. If you've applied and you do not receive a ballot, you did not get it yet, you can still go to the polls and you will have to vote a provisional ballot. So you will still be able to cast your ballot. So you have these opportunities. If you've been notified by your county that there's a problem with your ballot, you can go vote a provision. If you cannot correct it, if you don't have the ability to get to your county election office to cure it, or the county may not offer that, you can go and vote a provisional ballot for that as well. So that's my
Your spiel. I love it.
to try to get, to try to make sure the folks, I thought that might be more helpful than going back to the original process of applying. Look, mail voting is secure. We've been using it in this country on a regular basis since the Civil War. And actually, I've seen references, which is remarkable, but it's not always talked about, that Pennsylvania voters were actually casting a form of mail ballots back in the War of 1812 in Pennsylvania. So it's pretty remarkable. They are secure. Counties check. Their IDs are required. ID identification is required either through the driver's license number or the last four of the social. Counties verify, they double check. When ballots come back, again, they are verified that they are the voter, this is the voter who was supposed to return the ballot. They are secured. All of those processes, when those ballots get back to the county, are open. They are open to observers, watchers, even to the public in some cases. So again, all of those things that occur with mail ballots are done in an open environment and required by law for people to be able to observe those processes. That should never should be done behind closed doors.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's so important. First of all, yeah, the deadline did pass, so that's not an option anymore. But now people have this information for the future, for the next election, the next primary for next year. But also, I think the information around an emergency application to be able to submit an alternative kind of, if you're not able to attend on the polling place, it's not an alternative ballot, but it's like somebody can actually go and be your what's the word, like your kind of proxy,
Yeah,
but that also they have they have to have your ballot, and they also have to have the actual application. So we have a guide all about mail ballots that has been posted in the link, so people can look into that more. Jeff, one question for you about mail ballots: if people did already send it off in the mail and weren't able to drop it off at the county elections office or at a Dropbox site, how can they check the status to see where their mail ballot is and if it's been kind of received?
And look, we got those questions a lot. There's two things. Number one, if the voter gave an email address to the county, they should get some type of a notification once the ballot is received. That's the best, hopefully best method. I would recommend calling the county, but look, if a county's got 50,000 mail ballots sitting somewhere and they don't have them in any order, we would always put them in precinct in alphabetical order as well to find those quickly. Our county would do our best to find them. Worst case scenario, and this is common for voters who cannot confirm that their mail ballot has been received, is if you can go to the polls on Tuesday, go and vote a provisional ballot. Worst case scenario is you wasted some time. If they in fact received your mail ballot on time and it's good, it will be counted and your provisional ballot will obviously not be. But if for some reason your mail ballot did not arrive on time, then you've cast a provisional ballot and that will be counted.
Excellent. Shallow, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that. It was pretty comprehensive, but I want to give you an opportunity.
Yeah, it was very comprehensive. I'll just remind and emphasize that while you are completing your vote by mail ballot, please, please, please insert the marked ballot into the secrecy envelope that is marked official election ballot. Seal the envelope. Don't make any marks on that envelope. Insert that envelope into the outer return envelope that is addressed to the county. And then please make sure to sign your name and handwrite the date on that return envelope. You have to do all of those steps to make sure that your ballot is counted. So just a reminder to folks, the instructions are there, but sometimes it can get a little confusing, multiple envelopes. So put your marked ballot in the secrecy envelope, then that goes inside of the outer envelope. And then please make sure sign and date the outside of the envelope. And then again, suggestion, drop it off in person instead of putting it in the mail, so you can make sure that it was actually got there on time, so that we can ensure that as many votes as possible are counted. To what Jeff said earlier about as hard as the post office works, those are some hardworking people. A lot of people, a lot of time, a lot of transitions. Be safe. Drop it off at your county board of elections office.
And look, it's a big deal. One of the issues that we've really been advocating for is to remove the requirement for the secrecy envelope, to make it optional, and to remove the date requirement. Obviously, the signature is required. We had almost 16,000 ballots set aside in Pennsylvania, probably more. That was what we could gather, or at least confirm, for technical defects on that envelope. And these were 16,000 eligible voters who are qualified and should have had their vote counted, because of a technical issue, had their ballot set aside. And to me, it's so critical. We worry about, in-person voter fraud. You hear that conversation a lot, which almost never happens. It's so unusual and rare. We've never prosecuted anybody for in-person voter fraud, but to set aside 16,000 eligible voters' ballots because they forgot to write the date, or they wrote the wrong date, or they forgot to put it in a secrecy envelope, which, quite honestly, I understand the law requires their privacy. Counties, the way they are handling ballots now, that privacy is protected. It's almost all automated now. Nobody is matching the outer envelope with the ballot anymore.
Yeah, that's a good reminder to everybody who is in our audience this evening, or who has friends or family who are voting via a mail ballot, to make sure to follow those instructions and directions so that the vote is counted. That is so important, so critical. We don't want anybody's potentially eligible votes otherwise to just be put aside because they misstated, or they forgot to put a date, or they didn't put it in a secrecy envelope. So please make sure to follow those instructions very thoroughly. So I want to shift a little bit and talk about some potential scenarios that folks may encounter at a polling place. And, these things can happen for a variety of different reasons, but I really want to talk through them so that, if folks encounter this next Tuesday, they kind of know what to do and feel prepared. So Jeff, if a person is registered, they have an active registration, and they show up at their polling place, and for whatever reason they're not listed there, maybe they moved, maybe they're actually at the wrong polling place, like, what steps should they take? What comes next after they've kind of gotten into this situation?
Sure. And that it's, unfortunately, it's common. People end up in the wrong location occasionally. They forgot that they updated their voter registration, and they show up at the precinct they've been voting at for 10 years. So the first thing, hopefully, in most counties, in a county like ours, our poll workers would reach out to the county election office to try to verify the voter's registration. I'm not 100% sure about the Philadelphia e-poll books, if they have the capability of checking the voters county-wide, or if they just have the precinct list of voters, because I have not used those. They can be used either way, though. In some cases, if they have the capability, like in a place like Philly with electronic poll books, and they can actually search the entire county's voter database, they may be able to tell the voter right then, this is where you're supposed to go, and please go there and you can vote. If they cannot be found, or if for whatever reason, let's say the voter, I can't make it to this other place, I don't have a way to get there, they have the right to vote a provisional ballot. So, and this is one of the things we always made clear in our training. Not only do they have the right to vote a provisional ballot, the law says that the county has to offer it. So occasionally we had poll workers who would be like, well, look, if they don't ask, I'm not going to tell them, almost like forcing the voter to have to, well, I'm not in the poll book, so now what do I do? And nobody wants to say anything. The voter doesn't have to ask. The poll worker should. So if for whatever reason you are not in the book, you can't vote a regular ballot at your precinct, and you are not in the book or you don't know where you're going to vote, you have the absolute right to get a provisional ballot. If they don't offer you one, you should demand one. I know I am entitled to vote a provisional ballot. In that case, if you are in the wrong precinct and you are registered, legally registered, that ballot would be partially counted. So the races that, like if you were voting for a council race that was different in wherever you were voting versus where you're registered, that wouldn't be counted. But all of the state races, all the countywide races could be counted, partially counted. So that's important. If you are uncertain, there are advocacy organizations, election protection organizations that, like the 866 our vote number. If you can't get satisfaction from the poll workers, my first suggestion would be to try to reach the county, but that's not always easy either. Then try to reach out to the election protection folks at the 866 number, and somebody should hopefully be able to advise you. And or if there's somebody working outside the polling place, say, look, they just told me I wasn't registered here, but I don't think I'm registered anywhere. I want to vote a provisional ballot. Now look, in the end, if they're not legally registered, that provisional would not be counted, so that's obvious. But if it was a mistake by the county, we maybe we find a voter's registration application that we received on time. It was time stamped before the deadline, but it got mixed up in a different pile. We didn't process it. If that voter walks away and doesn't cast a provisional ballot, they're out of luck. There's no second day. If they cast a provisional ballot, the county election office investigates and we find, oh shoot, their registration was here. We messed up. That provisional ballot could then be counted. So it's critical that they understand their rights, that they have the absolute right before they leave to cast a provisional ballot.
Excellent. That is very important for everyone to be aware of. Shallow, I want to ask you a different question, more around what happens if somebody shows up and they're asked for to show identification. Under what circumstances is that okay, and under which is it not?
Yeah. So I'll just throw in that folks can also go to votespa.com to look up their voter registration status. So even if the folks even if the folks that are staffing your polling location aren't able to look it up in their system, pull out your cell phone, votespa.com as well. When you get to your polling location on election day, so in Pennsylvania, we have first-time ID requirements for first-time voters. So if this is the first time that you are voting, please make sure that you have your ID with you. Whether it's the first time that you are voting, period, because you're 18 or 19 or 20, or you just haven't voted before and you may be 75, right? Or if it's the first time that you are voting inside of the county, you've moved recently, just make sure to have your ID on you. If this is not the first time that you are actually voting, you should not be asked for your ID. We actually did a poll earlier this year of voters in Pennsylvania, and we did find out that a lot of folks are being asked for IDs when they're going to vote, even if they're not first-time voters. And sometimes it's because the poll worker just is trying to make sure they understand what your name is and they have the best of intentions. Sometimes it's nefarious ask, hoping that someone doesn't have an ID and that if they don't have it, they won't vote. They'll just end up leaving thinking that they are not able to vote. So you have to make sure that you also know your rights, right? And so our Pennsylvania Voice actually has a website called Keystone Votes that I'm going to direct you to. And we have Know Your Right material. So all the information we just shared about how to make sure that you can vote by mail and your rights when it comes to voting by mail, how to make sure you know your rights when you are voting in person. We have all of those materials in 18 different languages on the Keystone Votes website. So I'll point you there if you have the opportunity, something's happening in real time. Also want to echo Jeff, 1-866 our vote. I mentioned at the top of the call, one of our partners in the field is the ACLU and Common Cause and Lawyers Committee, who really do a lot of work around that and prepping folks to be able to support you in real time on election day, regardless of your issue. So if you don't know where your polling location is, or you get to your polling location and it's not open, which sometimes happens because, again, all of us are people. Election workers are people, y'all. And sometimes there's mitigating circumstances. But if it's something that can be rectified, they want to support in making sure that you're able to vote. So call that 1-866-OUR vote number if you have any questions on election day. But particularly if you are being asked to show your ID and you are not a first-time voter, just let the poll worker know. Like, actually, I'm not a first-time voter, and I don't believe that I should be asked to show my ID. Understand for yourself that you shouldn't be asked. But if you are a first-time voter, please understand that you will be asked to show ID as per Pennsylvania law.
And let me throw in a nice little helpful tip for voters in this situation. So our poll workers do not have to guess who has to show ID in Pennsylvania. We print in the poll books the words ID required for any voter who is required to show ID. If you as a voter are asked, you don't think you're supposed to show ID, I would literally say, can you show me in the poll book where it says, next to my name in my box, show me where it says ID is required. And if they show you ID required, well, then yeah, you're going to have to show ID. There's some reason. Again, it could be you are voting for the first time in a new precinct. So you don't have to even be a first time voter. I could have voted for 20 years in precinct 1 and I moved to precinct 2. The first time I vote in precinct 2, I have to show ID, even if it's in the same county. So you understand it. But if it doesn't say ID required in the poll book, then they absolutely cannot ask you for an ID. And you should report that to the county. I would call the county election. I would report it to the judge first. Hopefully they can resolve it there. If they don't resolve it, then again, try to reach the county or the 866-hour vote.
I love that tip, Jeff. I actually hadn't heard that tip before, and I am going to start telling people to do that. So,
Yeah.
stolen, thank you. But also just want to lift up, I didn't mention this earlier, when you're being asked for that ID, it does not mean PennDOT driver's license or PennDOT ID. That ID can be a photo ID, including an employee or a student ID if you have one. It could also be a non-photo ID. You can bring your utility bill or a bank statement that has your address on it. So just also want to lift up that when you're being asked for that ID, it does not have to be an official Pennsylvania government PennDOT ID. There's lots of other forms of IDs that are also acceptable. But thank you so much for that tip, Jeff.
Yeah, both of you are just giving really excellent advice. I hope people out there are taking notes. I want to shift, we're almost getting to the end of our panel this evening. So I want to be mindful of time and shift to some kind of rapid questions and some audience questions. The first one is really important. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is research and having an understanding of who is on the ballot, what is on the ballot. So Joanne B asks, is there a way to see my voting ballot ahead of election day?
I will tell you in our county, and I think I can't say every county does this. We put all the ballots on our website. So you could actually go see your ballot proof on our websites. We always had them in the election office. I believe almost all counties are posting those electronically. Every county is required to advertise in their county newspaper the ballot leading up to between 10 and 3 days of election day. So that should be occurring. That's another opportunity to see who's on the ballot, but the county's website is going to be your best. And there's the advocacy organizations like ours. Committee of 70 has a ballot tool where you can go and actually plug in your address or your precinct, and you can see all of the folks there. And I know there's other organizations that are doing that as well.
So helpful and so important. It's always, I can be overwhelming to step into the voting booth and see all these questions and names. And so if you're able to see it ahead of time, it can be really helpful. And once again, kind of tying in that research and feeling confident about who it is and what it is that you're voting for. Shalua, where can people find where their polling place is? How can they get that information?
So votespa.com, which I mentioned earlier, which is also vote.pa.gov, but votespa.com to keep it simple. If you go on there, it is a great resource that gives you access to information about voting, what the dates are, your deadline for registering, the deadline we talked earlier about vote by mail. But it also gives you a tool where if you put in your address, it will give you information about where you vote, your polling location, and all of that great information. So I'm going to point you over there. You can also go to your county commissioner's website as well, as Jeff mentioned earlier. I know for a fact you can find it on the Philadelphia site, but I'm nearly certain you can find it on all county commissioners' websites.
And
Excellent.
again, the counties are required by law to advertise all of those polling locations as well. Again, with between 10 and 3 days prior. So it should have been this week sometime.
Yeah. And this is going to be a very basic question, but just as a reminder to folks out there, Jeff, when is election day and what time do polls open and what time do they close?
So Pennsylvania elections open, the polls open on Tuesday at 7 a.m. and they close at 8 p.m. And one of the things that's important to remember, Pennsylvania law says if you as a voter are in line at 8 p.m., you are entitled to vote. So if that line in that precinct stretches out onto the sidewalk, the poll workers can't pull the door shut and say, "Oh, you guys on the sidewalk are out of luck. It's 8 o'clock. The polls are closed." They should mark the line with one of their workers, and then everybody who's in front of that last person, they get to vote. They get to vote a regular ballot. They get to vote on the machine as long as they're active and registered. And the county cannot, or the poll workers cannot shut anything down. And I had that happen one year, many years ago, where voters were told they had to vote. They ended up giving them provisional ballots after 8 o'clock, and I was not happy. And I corrected the poll workers so it would never happen again. But the voters did get to vote. We counted their provisionals, but they should have been entitled to vote on the machine. But every voter. So do not let, again, the judge of election should announce out loud, it's 8 o'clock and the polls are closed. You may not hear that, unfortunately, but there should be a clear announcement when the polls are closed so that everybody in the room knows that now anybody who comes now later, they're not going to be able to vote.
Excellent. And on that note, I'm curious, like, is there anything else that Pennsylvania voters should be aware of in terms of their rights, in terms of like the voting process for next Tuesday, November 7th? Is there anything that we haven't necessarily discussed that you want to make sure people know about? Whether, we talked about if you're in line by 8, like you're guaranteed a right to vote. If your name isn't on a list, but you're an active your registration is active, like you can indeed fill out a provisional ballot and that you're entitled to that. Is there anything else along those lines that kind of comes up frequently that you want to make sure people are aware of?
I can't think of anything, Shallow, anything. I think we hit all the high points, hopefully to get some folks through Tuesday.
Yeah, I think that we've talked about all the really important pieces. I would just remind and relift some of the stuff that both Jeff and I have talked about. If you have your vote by mail ballot still, strong suggestion is to drop it off in person, but also just a reminder to follow the specific instructions on that vote by mail ballot. Make sure that you get it in the secrecy envelope. Put the secrecy envelope inside of the other envelope and then sign and date the outside of the envelope before you follow our strong suggestion of dropping it off in person instead of putting it in the mailbox. But then also just lifting up 7 a.m. If you get to your polling location and for some reason the polling location is not open, you can call your county, let them know there's likely somebody on the way. You can also call the 1-866 Our Vote hotline with any questions that you have between now and election day. There are lawyers and volunteer staffing ready to support you, ready to throw down and help you in any ways possible to make sure that you can cast that ballot. And so just encouraging everyone, make sure that you plan to vote, what time, where, who are you voting with, where is your polling location, what time are you going to go actually get there, what's your means of transportation getting there. what's going to happen to folks that you take care of during the time that you have to vote. Just make sure you take a moment and think about the answer to those questions. Text your friends, ask them if they voted yet. Text your family, be that annoying person. The more people that actually participate, the better and stronger democracy that we have.
And I'll throw out one real quick because I know we're almost running out of time. As a former election director, I've got to say, please don't take your frustrations out on the poll workers. The poll workers aren't making the decisions. The poll workers aren't doing the registration. The poll workers aren't handling mail ballots. The poll workers are your neighbors. They're your friends. If you encounter an issue, don't escalate it to a point where there's anger, confrontation, yelling. Please handle it calmly. Call the 866 number, call the county election office instead of having some type of a verbal confrontation. So please don't take it out on those folks. They are not the people who are going to solve your problem. They aren't the people who are making those decisions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that reminder. I know that we're almost at time. I have just one last audience question before we wrap up and close out, from Sue. She says, after every election, I hear stories of persons with disabilities who have difficulty voting because of inaccessible locations or voting equipment, or uninformed or rude poll workers. What can be done to improve voting opportunities and experiences for people with disabilities? Shalwa, I'm going to hand that over to you, and you can, keep it as brief or as long as you want, given the time.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. And I'll just say, unfortunately, I've heard those stories too. I've been running programs in the field since 2010, and I've heard those stories often. I think in every situation, what we can do in real time is support that voter as much as possible. What I have seen in the past is I have seen times where a polling location was marked as accessible. Someone got there, it wasn't accessible. And it was able for the judge of elections to support that voter in voting provisionally without having to enter the polling location. I've seen that before in emergency situations. I've seen folks, and there's such a support network of people trying to make sure that everyone can cast their ballot on election day, that sometimes if you call the 1-866 Our Vote number, that you may be actually able to see if someone can support you with actually getting to another accessible polling location and identifying where one of those may be. So when in doubt, between now and election day, I'd say call 1-866 Our Vote. I think that the more resources that we have for counties and for the Department of State for our elections, the more prepared we can be, the more accessible polling locations we can have. But in real time on election day, when someone's trying to vote, we really just focus on supporting that voter. And so I would encourage them to call 1-866 Our Vote, and that team of folks can make sure that you're able to cast that ballot.
And I'll just add, as far as it's disappointing to hear that voters are being treated improperly. We included dealing with voters with accessibility issues in our training. So to me, if there's issues occurring in a county, multiple issues, it would be incumbent upon somebody reaching out to the county commissioners, the Board of Elections, and suggesting that they add that to their training. That it's not hard. I know there's so many other issues that they need to focus on, but that's also critical. And we worked it into our training in Mercer County, and that would hopefully help minimize those exchanges.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that if people see anything at the polls that feels suspicious, or wrong, to call, report. I think that's something that sometimes people don't know what to do, but people should feel empowered, to make those calls, to complain, to report, so that whatever potential situation is happening can be resolved and mitigated. So that's all the time that we have for this evening. I want to thank you all so much, audience members who were here tonight and joined, and to our lovely panelists, Jeff Greenberg and Shalwa Ogunmefin, for sharing their knowledge with us. You two were fantastic. Thank you so much. For those of you who are looking to know what's going on with the election, looking for coverage, resources, candidate guides, please visit spotlightpa.org/elections. I'm Elizabeth Estrada. Have a great night. Thank you so much for joining us. And go vote next Tuesday, November 7th.
Thank you.
Bye.